We did say that this running back free agency class was going to be absolutely wild. One of the best and craziest ones in years. Day one, and man, it has lived up to the hype and then some. Welcome everybody to JG9 News, where we talk all things NFL all the time. I'm Jaro Garanai, representing the 904 from the 602, and today we are talking about the Cincinnati Bengals making a move at running back. A new man in and a legend, or a team legend I should say, leaves. Zack Moss, the new running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, 2-year deal worth $8 million, so $4 million a year. And Joe Mixon, after 7 seasons with the Cincinnati Bengals, is out. I want to talk about Zack Moss quickly before I move on to Joe Mixon and what this means for him and what this means for the Bengals going forward and why this one makes a ton of sense. So Zack Moss played very well last season. He started the first 4 games he played before JT came back. Jonathan Taylor came back with a contract holdout. I shouldn't say he started the first 4 games. He was inactive for the first game, but he started games 2 through 5. And in those games, 445 yards rushing, 5 yards a carry, played very well. Now, understandably, his playing time went down after that, but he can definitely be a feature back. The Colts have a ton of cap space, but it didn't make a lot of sense to bring Zack Moss back and pay him $4 million a year because he's going to be a running back too. That's just poor roster construction all the way around. What the Colts do at running back at this point, behind Jonathan Taylor, you could bring back Nyheim Hines, bring him back as your third down pass catching back. You could draft a guy. Obviously, they're going to do something because the depth behind Jonathan Taylor is absolutely poor. We saw that in particular in week 1 when neither Zack Moss nor Jonathan Taylor played, and the Jags' run defense just absolutely feasted on them. Granted, the Jags' run defense was feasting for the first 3 months of the season. Don't really know what happened the final month of the season, but the Colts' run game definitely needs some improvements behind Jonathan Taylor. Zack Moss, no longer there. He is now a Cincinnati Bengal, meaning that Joe Mixon, after 7 seasons with the Bengals, is out. Mixon ends his career in Cincinnati with 6,412 rushing yards and 49 rushing touchdowns. He ends his career 3rd all-time in franchise history in rushing yards and 2nd all-time in rushing touchdowns. In terms of his Bengal legacy, it's a strong one. It's a very strong one. He is definitely one of the top 5 Bengal running backs of all time. You can make an argument for top 3. Obviously, your top 5 in no particular order. You got Pete Johnson, you got Corey Dillon, you got James Brooks. You got on top of that Joe Mixon and Rudy Johnson. I would put Mixon above Johnson, depending on how Bengal fans view Corey Dillon, because obviously it ended on very sour grounds, ended on very shaky terms. You could put him above Dillon. I'm not putting him above Pete Johnson, not putting him above James Brooks. So when I clarified Johnson, I meant Rudy Johnson, not Pete Johnson. Pete Johnson, James Brooks are 1-2. I'd probably go Brooks over Johnson, but that's beside the point. Regardless, Mixon, very good player in Cincinnati, but it was a move that made a lot of sense. Had a feeling the writing was on the wall, and Joe Mixon was going to be cut. First off, there's a lot of wear and tear on Mixon already. Over 1,500 carries. Pro Football Focus did a study where they evaluated when do running backs typically decline. And the points seem to be 7+ seasons in the NFL plus 1,500 carries, you're going to regress. Now, there are some exceptions to the rule, obviously. You got guys like Derrick Henry who have shown no signs of slowing down whatsoever. I know that as a Jaguar fan. But a guy like Joe Mixon, 7+ seasons, 1,500 carries. He's going to be entering his 8th season in 2024. He's near 1,600 carries. He's a prime candidate for regression. For some perspective, Zack Moss, his first season in the NFL was 2020, and he is at 484 carries, so he has plenty left in the tank. Mixon definitely past the prime of his career. On top of that, the salary cap, it was bad for Joe Mixon. He was costing the Bengals $8 million against the cap. Now, this cut does impact the cap in the sense that it is $2.75 million in dead cap space, but you do save $6.1 million by cutting Mixon. If we look at it as the $2.75 million in dead cap space plus the $4 million for Zack Moss, we don't know the whole terms of the contract, necessarily what the cap hit is for Zack Moss in year 1 versus year 2, but if we assume $4 million in year 1, we split it right down the middle, you're still saving over $1 million in cap space by cutting Mixon and making this move and getting a better, younger running back with more in the tank. And maybe you can use that extra money to potentially re-sign T. Higgins. Obviously, Higgins wants out of Cincinnati. That news came out earlier today. Looks like they're not going to get a new contract done, but some pennies here and there, maybe things change. Okay, so while I was editing this video, we just got the terms of the contract. According to Mike Garafolo, it's going to be $4.525 million in the first year for Moss, So it's more of a front-loaded contract, but still a pretty substantial amount of money going in year 2. But the majority of the money is coming in the first year, so 2024. On top of that, Joe Mixon struggled a ton last year. The last 2 seasons, he's averaging under 4 yards a carry, which is not good. You want to be averaging at least 4 yards a carry for a running back. That seems to be the line to be at. Under 4 yards a carry, not the best. Now, some of that could be the offensive line, but a lot of that can be with the running back. Joe Mixon, maybe a bit of both. He only went over 100 yards in the last 2 seasons, twice. And one of those games, I have to put a giant asterisk next to that because it was this past season, Week 18 against the Cleveland Browns, and the Browns had absolutely nothing to play for that game. They locked up the number 5 seed, so they played a lot of their backups. They basically rested a ton of guys because they had the 5 seed locked up, and they were taking a de facto bye week going into that Texans game for the wild card round, which obviously didn't work out as they got annihilated by the Texans, but that's neither here nor there. Either way, Joe Mixon from weeks 5 through 17 last season averaged just 3.6 yards per carry, super inconsistent. 8 of those 12 games, under 4 yards a carry. This was a man routinely getting 40, 50 rushing yards a game. It was nothing really to write home about. Joe Mixon, it makes a lot of sense to move on from him. Where does he end up? I could see him somewhere in Texas. Like I said earlier in my Aaron Jones video, when I talked about the Packers letting go of Aaron Jones, I think that Jones will wind up with either the Houston Texans or the Dallas Cowboys. There are some talks that he could wind up with the Minnesota Vikings, go to a division rival there. They just released Alexander Madison, who was not that good last year. The Vikings definitely need to upgrade at running back, so he could wind up in Minnesota. But either way, Mixon, I think, will wind up somewhere in Texas. Whoever loses out on Aaron Jones, whether it's the Cowboys because they need running back help badly, whether it's the Texans because they need running back help badly, seeing as Devin Singletary is now a New York Giant, I think he winds up somewhere in the Lone Star State. His career is not done, but he's definitely past the prime of his career. His market might not be the best, considering his poor play, relatively speaking, over the last 2 years, considering how much wear and tear he has on his body already, and considering the ultra-competitive market for running backs right now in free agency. Either way, Joe Mixon, heck of a career in Cincinnati. His time is done after 7 seasons. And Zack Moss, the newest member of the Cincinnati Bengals, as they make a splash in free agency. It's been a rough day for Cincinnati on day 1 of legal tampering. T. Higgins requesting a trade. You lost Awuzie to the Tennessee Titans at cornerback. But this move is a pretty good one for Cincinnati. They get on the board late in the night, but they do get on the board. But what are your thoughts on the Zack Moss move? What are your thoughts on the Joe Mixon release? Do you think that Mixon winds up somewhere? Where do you think he winds up? Do you still think he has anything left in the tank? Where do you think he will go? Do you have any fond memories of Mixon? And in terms of Zack Moss, is it a good move for the Bengals, a bad move for the Bengals? Would you have moved on from Mixon to sign Zack Moss? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And that's going to do it for this episode of JG9 News. Be sure you like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out my main channel, JaguarGare9, where we talk all things NFL history all the time. Until next time, this is JaguarGare9 signing off. And as always, go Jags.